All right, so over the next few lectures, what we're going to be talking about is energy production and energy conversion in various cells. Okay, so and before we do that, I want to talk about really what energy is and the importance of enzymes for the ability for the cells to do work. Okay, because without enzymes, a lot of the reactions that organisms are dependent upon, including us, wouldn't happen. So, what is energy? Energy is defined as the capacity to do work, and there's two types basically. There's kinetic energy, okay, which is energy in motion. All right, then there's potential energy, which is stored energy. And now energy can be converted or transformed from potential to kinetic and vice versa. All right, and so it's very important to keep that in mind. Energy that is stored, that is potential energy, can be transformed into kinetic energy. Now, the study of energy is called the thermodynamics, and these laws of thermodynamics govern how energy works. Right, so the first law of thermodynamics states that energy of the universe is constant. Energy can be transferred or transformed, but it cannot be created nor destroyed. All right, so energy just doesn't appear, or energy just doesn't go away. All right, it changes. It can be transferred or transformed, but it's not going away, and it doesn't just come out of the blue. All right, then you have the second law of thermodynamics that states that energy disperses spontaneously. All right, and that kind of brings in this idea of entropy. Okay, and entropy is the measure of how much energy of a system is dispersed. Okay, and dispersed spontaneously. So entropy is the measure of disorder. And every energy transfer, okay, going between the two types, increases the entropy of the universe. Now, ordered complex molecules are broken down by cells, and energy from molecules is lost to their surroundings as heat. So when a cell breaks down a complex molecule, a polymer, into the smaller pieces, all right, by breaking that energy down, you're breaking the bonds. And that bond, and those bonds that are holding that molecule together, or that polymer together, is stored energy, is potential energy. Okay, and so when those bonds are broken, that energy is transferred from that potential energy as bonds into kinetic energy as heat. All right, and so heat is still energy, so the first law of thermodynamics is not broken. Okay, so during a reaction, one or more reactants become one or more products. And so reactant is a molecule that enters a reaction and is changed by participating in that reaction. And a product is a molecule that is produced by a reaction. All right, so here you have two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. Okay? All right, so an oxygen molecule. All right, so you have, and I think I misspoke as well. So you have two hydrogen molecules and one oxygen molecule, but you have four hydrogen atoms total and two oxygen atoms total. Well, when they come together in a reaction, they're going to produce two molecules of water. Okay, and as you can see, you still have the same number of atoms of hydrogen and the same number of atoms as as oxygen. So 4 and 2. All right, but through this reaction, you have a production of two molecules of water. All right, and so again, there's going to be bonds, the chemical bonds, and the product of these two water molecules, and those chemical bonds are going to be considered potential energy, stored energy. So bond energy and entropy both contribute to a molecule's free energy, okay, which is the amount of energy available to do work. And so when you are thinking about chemical reactions, it's important to think about the system's free energy, or the whole reaction's free energy. Okay, so reactants are on the left-hand side, and the products on the right side, and each side has the amount of free energy. Okay, so on each side of the chemical reaction, there is amount of free energy. Okay, so the reactants have an amount of free energy, and the products have an amount of free energy. So if the free energy decreases from the reactants to the products, then the reaction can be spontaneous. Okay, so if the free energy on the reactant side is higher than the free energy on the product side, then that reaction can be spontaneous. Okay, all right, and the products are said to be more stable. And that decrease in free energy going from the reactants to the products, all right, is energy being released by the reaction. And reactions that release energy are called exergonic reactions. So exergonic reactions are reactions that have the release of energy out, and the reaction that ends with a net release of free energy. All right, so exergonic reactions, their reactants have a higher amount of free energy than the products. All right. Now, if we look about it on the opposite side of the coin, all right, reactants have a lower amount of free energy than the product side, then it's going to take energy for that reaction to occur. All right, so you have to have an input of energy. All right, so a reaction that requires a net input of energy, free energy, to proceed is considered an endergonic reaction. All right, so think about how that word sounds, endergonic, okay? Energy in. Okay, you need an input of energy for that reaction to occur. All right, and so here's a couple examples, okay? All right, so let's start here. So you have a glucose molecule, all right, and 6 oxygen molecules. All right, well, when they come together in a chemical reaction, the amount of free energy on the reactant side is higher than the amount of free energy on the product side. So you have a release of energy, making this an exergonic reaction. Okay, now if we flip that chemical reaction and be like, hey, we're going to take 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules, have a reaction so that we can produce glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. Okay, all right, then the free energy on the reactant side is lower than the free energy on the product side. So you have to have an input of energy. So this makes this an endergonic reaction. Okay, all right, so here's a good way of looking at it. Okay, so this delta G signifies free energy. All right, and so if the delta G, the free energy, is higher on the product side, okay, it's higher on the product side, then it signifies an endergonic reaction. If the free energy, okay, is let's see, let me step back. So delta G is the difference in free energy. Okay, the delta G is the difference in free energy from the reactants and the product side. So if that delta G is positive, okay, if delta G is greater than 0, then it's an endergonic reaction. If the delta G is negative, okay, that signifies that the amount of free energy on the on the reactant side is higher than the product side, and that delta is so that if the delta G is negative, you have an exergonic reaction. So cells store energy by running endergonic reactions that build organic compounds. All right. And so cells harvest energy by running exergonic reactions that break the bonds of organic compounds. All right. So we're going to be talking about a lot of exergonic and endergonic reactions in our next two lectures after this, because we're going to be talking about aerobic respiration next, and then photosynthesis after that. Okay, and so the photosynthesis has a number of endergonic reactions involved, because that is a process of producing energy. Okay, whereas aerobic respiration, you're trying to create energy. All right, and so aerobic respiration, we're going to see a number of exergonic reactions. Okay, and again, just to reinforce this idea of endergonic reactions, you have to have an input of energy. All right, and you usually see endergonic reactions when you are building larger compounds from smaller molecules. But when you are breaking those compounds down, as such what happens in cellular metabolism, okay, cellular respiration, when you are breaking those compounds down into smaller molecules, then you have a release of energy, all right, thus signifying exergonic reactions. All right, and in a lot of these reactions, the phosphate from adenosine triphosphate, remember there's ATP again, and what type of macromolecule is ATP? It's a nucleic acid. All right, and what we see in a lot of reactions, that third phosphate group from ATP is transferred to one of the reactants in a reaction, all right, that makes it unstable and thus able to be transformed to the product. Okay, so basically the input of ATP in a reaction is an input of energy. Okay, all right. So when you have the breakdown of ATP, all right, that is an exergonic reaction. So when you remove that third phosphate, that produces energy. All right, so when ATP goes from ATP to ADP, that releases energy. That's an exergonic reaction. Well, that energy can be used for something. All right, so that's what I was talking about before. That energy that comes from the breakdown of ATP can be coupled with another reaction that needs an input of energy. Okay, and so that goes to this idea of energy coupling. So a lot of times cells will couple an exergonic with an endergonic reaction to help fuel that endergonic reaction. All right, because that exergonic reaction will produce energy spontaneously that then can be used by the endergonic reaction for it to work. All right, now to go from ADP to ATP, all right, that's an endergonic reaction. So to go from adenosine diphosphate back to adenosine triphosphate, that's an endergonic reaction. Okay, and so cellular respiration is the process that by which ATP is created, and where you're breaking down larger molecules to provide the energy to make ATP. All right, so ATP, whenever you see ATP, you should think energy molecule. Energy molecule. ATP equals energy molecule. And the cells use ATP, all right, to provide energy for a certain type of reaction. All right. All right, so to provide energy for an endergonic reaction. Now, when you're trying to make ATP, that requires energy as well. All right, and so when we're talking about cellular respiration in the next lecture, we're going to be talking about how the cell breaks down larger organic molecules to have the energy to make ATP. All right, so here again, here's a illustration of that energy coupling. So you have an exergonic reaction, the breakdown of ATP to ADP. All right, spontaneous energy. That spontaneous energy that can be used by this endergonic reaction for it to make the product. All right, so these delta G's here, all right, so here's your delta G, it's negative. So what should that tell you? It should tell you it's an exergonic reaction. All right, here's the delta G here, it's positive. So what should that tell you? All right, that positive delta G means that this is an endergonic reaction. But when you couple them together, you have enough free energy from here, okay, to make this reaction here. And so overall, when you couple them together, you have some free energy left over. You have enough free energy to make this endergonic reaction happen. Okay, and so that's why cells will couple an exergonic reaction with an endergonic reaction. But remember, to make ATP from ADP, that's an endergonic reaction. Okay, so you need energy input from cellular respiration. And then when you have ATP, all right, you have energy molecules that can be broken down and release energy for different things. All right, so for a reaction to happen, the reactants need to absorb energy to break their bonds. All right, and so that energy can be a tough obstacle to overcome. All right, and that energy requirement that we just talked about is called the activation energy. So the activation energy is the energy needed, okay, for the reaction to occur. All right, and specifically the activation energy is the energy needed to break the bonds of the reactants. All right, so how do cells overcome that activation energy? All right, usually in a lot of instances through the help of enzymes, because enzymes lower the activation energy of a reaction so it can occur more readily. So that's what we see here. So here you have reactants, okay? All right, and to break these bonds so that they can be transformed into the products, you have to get over this hump right here, and that signifies the activation energy. So from here to here is the amount of energy needed, all right, to break those bonds of the reactants without an enzyme present. But in the presence of an enzyme, all right, that activation energy gets lowered. So it's much easier, all right, for the activation energy requirement to be met so that the reactants can be transformed into the products. So enzymes are considered biological catalysts because they change the rate of reaction. They speed it up usually, okay? All right, they not only speed it up, in a lot of instances, they allow it to even happen in the first place. However, enzymes are not consumed in the reaction. Okay, so enzymes are biological catalysts because they change the rate of reaction without being consumed in that reaction. All right, now remember when we talked about organic molecules, when we were talking about sugars, we said if you see a chemical name that ends in OSE, that's a hint that tells you that it's a sugar. Even if you never heard of that molecule before, if it ends in OSE, that's a hint that it's a sugar. Same thing with enzymes. Okay, most enzymes end in ASE. All right, so if you see a molecule that ends in ASE, that's a hint that it's most likely an enzyme. Now, what type of macromolecule are enzymes? Okay, which of the four? Carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids. Do you remember? All right, we said that most enzymes are proteins. All right, so that really increases the importance of proteins, all right, because most enzymes that are important to the survival of cells are proteins. All right, so another way to think of activation energy is the energy required to bring the reactant bonds to their breaking point. All right, otherwise known as the transition state. And so at the transition state, so here, right here is that transition state. Basically, the height of that hill, all right, the highest point on this theoretical hill is the transition state. So at the transition state, the reaction can run without any additional energy output. All right, so the enzymes allow the reaction to reach that transition state a lot easier. Okay, so we'll stop there and then pick up more on enzymes on the next part.